if anyone else feels like this, but I am so sick of white women's self-love.
I am tired of BuzzFeed, girl boss, white feminism. Like, it's so oversaturated. We do not need more of this, and we need to stop centering white woman feelings in the conversation about feminism. White, cis-het woman. When you're discussing feminism, you cannot let misogyny separate you from your whiteness. You have to recognize your privilege at all times and be actively intersectional and make sure you're including everyone in the conversation. Trans woman, black woman, woman of color, queer woman. Because if you're not, it's just white supremacy. Just speaking for myself, white girl boss feminism it has never been empowering for me. I'm tired of it being pushed down my throat all the time. Self-love for a white cis-het woman is not self-love for me. Marginalized women are not included in mainstream feminism, which is why we have to create our own spaces.
White woman feminism. The words are often spoken dripping in derision, as if the combination of white with woman suddenly allows for verbalization of the disdain already held for those who call themselves feminist. Make no mistake, it's not the white part people have an issue with, it's the fact that women are standing up for themselves, that women want change, and that women are undertaking action to create it. The addition of the word white allows for a suitable target, one which will not result in being called a bigot, misogynist, or sexist.
Okay, I generally agree with that point, but then someone in the comments was like, and the term Karen is misogynistic too. And like, I had to take a second and like think, like, is it? Because in theory, there isn't like a male version of a Karen, but like, that's kind of the point, right? Because I believe it was the Black community that like started that whole dialogue of how historically it's always been the white woman who uses her whiteness and her proximity to the white male in order to tap into those systems of power for her own benefit at the expense of minorities and people less privileged, specifically the Black community, right? Like, isn't that like the origin, right? So like, I don't think it is misogynistic because intersectionality?
Have you all seen this disgustingly misogynistic take? Because let me tell you something. White women still have to worry about their right to an abortion and birth control being taken away. White women still have to worry about sexual assault. White women still deal with the harmful effects of beauty standards in our society. White women still deal with being demeaned and looked down upon because they are women. And that's just the tip of the iceberg of the oppression that women face. The patriarchy is structured so men have power over women. And this is not to say that you can't criticize white women, because as a Pakistani American woman, I've seen a lot of examples of racism and homophobia from white women. But how dare you say that they cannot be considered an oppressed group? Because that is extremely misogynistic.
In a world where victimization and oppression serve as a currency, especially in liberal spaces which have in the past few years made an effort to place those who were previously of an underrepresented underclass on a pedestal, racial privilege is one of the few aspects which cannot be changed. Under a postmodernist perspective, gender is only a matter of the mind. Material reality is not one that we can agree on. This logic only stretches so far. While some have been bullied into accepting that men can become women, can't have the same experiences, and in fact be extra oppressed for this choice to present as or identify as women, few would accept the idea that a white person could surely give up their privilege by identifying as another race. The idea of being transracial is offensive in a way that no one can truly deny. It implies that one can, by sake of feeling a certain way, typically by associating with stereotypes and surface-level understandings, become part of a group which they do not hold membership of. Gender is similarly defined. Association with stereotypes and the belief that femininity is the same as being a woman, that masculinity is the same as being a man, in a world where being a male is defined as the neutral and the human, all of the insult and impracticality of identifying as is ignored in order to soothe the egos of men who are typically being ejected from the role of most privileged. And yet, despite these white men identifying as women, if taken seriously, thus being white women themselves, it is white females who have the ire of not only trans women, but their allies.
Taylor Swift is one of many clear examples of
white feminism. And I feel like that's the reason most of the people who are obsessed with her are white girls. Taylor is always going to market herself as this relatable girl boss. She vaguely takes a stand on things, like she was queer baiting a couple years back. But if you actually look at her actions, it's very women hating on women and only speaking out when it bothers me and affects me. Like the whole Bad Blood music video and her feud with Katy Perry. It's just so obvious that her feminism is performative and not intersectional.
Women should support all other women. Yes, I don't totally agree. We're not gonna support bad women. We're not gonna support like Ghislaine Maxwell or Elizabeth Holmes, right? Yes, we are, because they are women. And if you're a feminist, you support other women. What if the woman did a bad thing to another woman? I'm getting the vibe that you're not a feminist. What? Oh, okay. What do you do to support women? Oh my god, I thought you would never ask. I sell #feminist sweatshirts on Etsy, and I also have a podcast where I talk about feminism in the Middle East. Even though I'm a white girl who's never been there, I still make a lot of comments. It is the adding of value and morality judgments to identity rather than a person's actions, which serves to create a class of women who are acceptable targets for misogyny and sexism. In the same way that white cis men are targets for the brunt of class issues, doing so ignores intersectionality is far more gray than liberals would like to admit. Being a disabled man does not mean that you do not oppress women. Disabled men visit prostitutes, sometimes paid for by their disability payments. Disabled men often get away with abusing women on account of their disability, such as sexually harassing women and it being excused because they have an intellectual disability. Being a black man does not mean that you do not oppress women. Black men oppress black women. Eldridge Cleaver, a prolific Black Panther, practiced raping black women before moving on to serially rape white women. He did so out of the view that he was getting back at white men for damaging their property. Oppression does not cancel out other venues of oppression, but creates an experience that is not so easily categorized into good people and bad people, victims and perpetrators. The term white woman feminism is often used to make fun of acts of feminism that are viewed as frivolous, useless, or transphobic. For example, art which uses imagery of female bodies is often derisively called white woman feminism, despite the fact that images of female genitalia and bodies are often highly restricted or highly sexualized, and not at all treated the same as male genitalia. Think back to high school, where you likely saw dicks drawn on every surface. Did you ever see vaginas drawn anywhere? In Japan, there's a festival celebrating the penis called Kanamura Matsuri. Meanwhile, artist Megumi Igarashi has been repeatedly arrested for creating art with yonic imagery. While you may not like the art, the truth is there is not a lot of anatomically correct imagery of female bodies. What we do see is often highly sexualized and dehumanizing. Take, for example, the trend of headless female bodies. They have no arms or legs, no head, their bodies are always contorted in ways to show off their breasts, thighs, and asses. They are meant to be viewed, not to view back. They illustrate a desire for women to be seen, not heard, and certainly not to think. Creating desexualized or subversive art of bodies that are typically highly sexualized is a feminist action, even if you disagree with it, even if you think it's silly. It does play an impact on how we view ourselves and other women. Where the hatred of this type of art seems to stem from is a jealousy that white-identified males cannot have those bodies. They tend to argue whenever women write about their experiences or portray them vividly without hiding anything that it is transphobic and exclusionary. One would not say the same if a black person was talking about their experiences with racism, or a disabled person with their experiences with ableism. Just because an experience is one that you do not have does not mean that it's not a valid one or that it doesn't exist. Just because artistic expression does not cater to you does not mean that it should. The use of the phrase white woman feminism is also used to separate radical feminist and gender critical views from other groups, which might illustrate how common and widespread this perspective is. Despite the fact that radical feminism is the most common form of feminism in the world, and that there are many black feminists who have agreed and continue to agree about the importance of acknowledging biological sex, there is an undeniable push to illustrate all trans-exclusionary radical feminists as being white. It serves to present these feminists as being bigoted, exclusionary, and privileged because of the perception of whiteness as being a master status that overrides any other form of oppression. Linking radical feminism with only white women makes the movement appear to be one that is bigoted, or one that only serves white women. This too is a racist stance, as not only does it present black women and other women of color as being too ignorant or innocent to understand the differences between men and women, but it often implicitly presents the idea that Western culture, particularly that of imperialism, brought the idea of sex-based oppression around the world. This is incorrect, as all cultures have examples of oppression against women, many of these from far before colonialism happened. Quite simply, all women have more in common with each other, regardless of their class, race, or sexuality, than trans-identified males do with women.
As a white woman, I can turn on the television, I can see my physical self represented, I can see many, many women like me, but the forms I find them in are often so contrived, they're so sexualized. Some of the greatest female heroines have been born in the hearts and minds of men. That's my difficulty, is watching old white men write for young women or write for any marginalized individual, because they just have no fucking idea what they're talking about.
There's a common experience based on our sex. We've been female socialized, raised in a society that values men over women in ways that we often don't even perceive. The phrase white woman feminism is nothing more than another verbal bludgeon, meant to shut down conversations by pointing out the existence of privilege based on race, while ignoring the fact that white women are still women and that they too face oppression because of that.
No, because I feel like this literally comes from like white men co-opting feminism of color without even understanding what it is that they're co-opting as a means of power. Like, think about how feminists of color had been calling for so long for people to acknowledge toxic masculinity, and that feminism is about more than equal pay, but like socialization. And then a bunch of fucking YouTubers and Twitch streamers like co-opted that shit, and now like when they dunk on women and say something horribly misogynistic, like, it's okay, their nails are painted. And in that same sense of like when feminists of color asked white women to check their privilege, somewhere along the way, white men started being like, yeah, fucking check your privilege. Like, what is going on? Be fucking serious. I just fucking hate it here, honestly.
When someone argues that an act of feminism is white woman feminism, ask them to explain. Do black women not have vaginas? Are breasts exclusive to the white race? Explain how womanhood has only been linked to white women, and surely their arguments fall apart. To argue otherwise is to ignore the fact that black women were specifically objectified, sexualized, and harassed based on their sex during slavery. It is to ignore the fact that the Chinese knew exactly whose feet to bind, that the Indians knew exactly which babies to drown in milk, that the Africans knew exactly whose genitals to brutalize. The other way in which white woman feminism is often used in an argument regarding choice feminism. Arguments such as sex work is real work, or prostitution is empowering, are presented as white woman feminist stances rather than as choice feminist stances, which many women of color who believe in gender ideology also support.
Something I've noticed about white feminism is that a lot of women make the assumption that nakedness and wearing revealing clothes is a form of liberation for all women, when it's really not. If that's a form of liberation for you, that's great. You should be able to do what you want with your body, wear whatever you want. But it makes an issue when you see women who choose to cover up a bit more and you make the assumption that they're somehow being oppressed or that they hate themselves or hate their bodies, etc. Because they're doing the exact same thing as you and using their rights of bodily autonomy to make a choice as to what they do and what they wear. So leave them alone. I've seen so many hijabi women post videos on TikTok and people will deadass be in their comments like, it's such a shame that she has to wear that, like, it's so sad. She's made the choice to wear it. Leave her alone.
The depiction of white women as just being as bad as or worse than white men only shifts blame without acknowledging that white women are oppressed as well. This is a stance that can coexist with acknowledging the fact that black women and other women of color, as well as gay and bisexual women, have been kept out of feminist movements in the past. After all, there are plenty of women of color who have made substantial additions to women's liberation, even when the ways in which race and sex or sexuality and sex impact the way that a woman lives her life are ignored in mainstream discussions. However, there are many issues that affect all women regardless of their sexuality or race.
What rights don't I have as a woman? Men in the White House are trying to take away my right to have a fucking abortion because of pro-choice, which is not fucking political. It's a human right. Secondly, you don't want women to marry women. Another right I wouldn't have as a fucking woman. 3, I can get my uterus taken out if I wanted to, because if my husband wants kids and I don't want kids, well, that's not my right as a woman, because I am apparently owned by a man for my entire life. Right as I come out of the womb, I am a man's property. I can't even go outside alone in my own fucking neighborhood because somebody can pull out and rape me, and even if I fight that in court, oh, there's not enough proof and it wasn't his fault, you shouldn't have been wearing that. You're gonna come at me as a man and ask me what rights don't I have as a woman? Try again.
Intersectionality is important for addressing the ways in which the female experience is different because of these intersecting identities. It's also important to note that some experiences still will not fall under feminism.
I only exist thanks to the intelligence of the humans who designed me.
Placing undue
They have something I could never have.
Ignoring the gender divide only serves to further class consciousness.
And what's that?
We can absolutely
A soul.
address intersectionality in the ways in which white women, on account of their race, are complicit in racist systems. We can do so without downplaying the extent of oppression that white women face, presenting this as being attributed to their gender, or continually shifting the conversation off of feminism and into other venues. This, dear viewers, is where we part. I want to make it clear, though, that the feminist movement has always had lesbians and bisexuals, super involved. There's always been black women and women of color involved. Their contributions may have been downplayed, their contributions might not have been acknowledged as much, but they've always been there, and there's always been class consciousness between people, women of all races, sexualities, etc. I just find it very interesting how, similarly to terms like Karen or almond mom, people recognize surface level understandings of this and then don't go any further. Yes, intersectionality is important, but how has men been able to use intersectionality to further their goals by continually placing the blame only on the white women and ignoring white men? How are we using race to ignore any meaningful conversations because we're putting value judgments based on race? There are people who are white, who, for example, Eastern Europeans, who are still oppressed because of their race, because they view race differently than we do in the US. There's so many, it's more nuanced than just if you're white, you're a bad person, and if you're straight, you're a bad person. It's a lot more complex than just if you have this identity, this makes you bad. And that's something that I think a lot of people in the gender movement just don't really understand, which might explain why so many of them like watching kids' cartoons that have such similar black and white views. But that's for another video. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.